The Soviet Union, a name that once shook the world, a titan, a global superpower. Its influence stretched across continents. They launched Sputnik, the first satellite. They sent a man to orbit the Earth. They helped defeat Nazism. Yet a profound emptiness festered. The soul of its people was under siege. The state declared God an illusion. Atheism became the official creed. Churches were shuttered or left to decay. Whispers of faith became acts of defiance. To believe openly was to risk everything. For 70 years, spiritual life was suppressed. Generations were raised without God. Spiritual hunger cannot be extinguished. It lay dormant, a smoldering ember, waiting to reignite. This was the Soviet paradox. Immense power, yet spiritual poverty. A regime severing humanity from its roots. Could it endure? History held its breath. The answer stirred in the Russian soul. A spiritual dawn after a long night. Then a new figure emerged onto the world stage, Mikhail Gorbachev. He ascended to the pinnacle of Soviet power. He spoke of radical change. He introduced words like glasnost and perestroika. These promised openness and restructuring. Few knew the secrets of his own heart. Persistent rumors whispered of a hidden faith, of a Christian upbringing that had quietly shaped him. Could the leader of the atheist state be a closet believer? Publicly, he was a loyal communist, yet the stories of his early life painted a different picture. His maternal grandparents were devoutly Orthodox. His grandmother, some claimed, had him secretly baptized. His actions hinted at something deeper, a certain empathy, a willingness to listen. He seemed to understand the profound yearning of the Soviet people. His policies began to create space for this unspoken longing. The foundations were shifting. Mikhail Gorbachev unleashed two words that would echo around the globe. Glasnost. This meant openness, perestroika. This signaled restructuring. These were intended as political tools. Yet these policies did more than tinker with the machinery of the state. They pierced the suffocating darkness that had enveloped Soviet society for decades. They let in a little light. Suddenly, people found their voices. They could speak more freely. They could question the unquestionable. The iron grip of censorship and state control began to loosen. For generations, religious faith had been a private, often perilous affair. Now a sliver of light appeared in the public square. The monolithic control started to show undeniable cracks. The fear began to recede. Faith, long suppressed, began to rush back into the public sphere. The spiritual dimension of life could no longer be contained. The atheist wall started to crumble. It was not breached by an external enemy. It began to collapse from within. December 1st, 1989, marked this date. Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the communist world, traveled to the Vatican. He met with Pope John Paul II, the head of the Roman Catholic Church. The Polish pontiff who knew firsthand the sting of communist oppression. Such an encounter would have been unthinkable just a few years prior. It was a meeting of two worlds, two ideologies, two men who held the fate of millions in their hands. The Pope was an implacable foe of atheistic communism. He was a tireless champion of religious freedom. This meeting was more than a diplomatic courtesy. It was profoundly symbolic. It signaled to the world that a profound shift was underway. For Gorbachev, this journey to the Vatican was an astonishingly bold step. It was a tacit acknowledgement of the spiritual dimension of human life. The encounter in Rome was a catalyst for the spiritual awakening that was to come. The floodgates, once cracked by glasnost, now burst open, slowly at first, then with an undeniable gathering rush. The people were thirsty. They were spiritually starved. For 7 decades, the state had offered them a diet of materialism and atheism. It had failed to nourish their souls. Now, as the constraints loosened, they reached out. They sought the living water that their parents and grandparents had known. A deep collective yearning surfaced. It was raw, it was powerful, it was undeniable. Whispers of faith blossomed into open conversations. Secret prayer meetings gave way to larger, more public gatherings. The suffocating cloak of fear began to lift. Grandmothers brought out icons that had been hidden for decades. Parents began to tell their children the sacred stories. A nation, long asleep in a spiritual winter, was unmistakably awakening. It was a dramatic resurgence, a people collectively reclaiming their spiritual inheritance. The official ideology of Marxism-Leninism now felt hollow. The human heart cried out for God. This spiritual revival was not orchestrated from above. It was a spontaneous spiritual uprising. The churches, for so long they had stood as silent, mournful witnesses. Many were decaying, some had been turned into warehouses, others became museums of atheism, some were even cinemas or sports halls. Now a miraculous change began. Their heavy doors, bolted for decades, creaked open, one by one, across the land. The sound of church bells began to ring out once more. It was a sound of hope, a sound of return. Dust was lovingly wiped from ancient precious icons. The faces of Christ, the Theotokos and the saints gazed out once more. The rich scent of incense began to fill the air again. It mingled with the prayers of the faithful. Priests, many of them old and weary, led the divine services. And alongside them, new, younger faces appeared, eager to learn the traditions, eager to serve, eager to believe. Sacred images returned to their rightful places in homes. Families gathered before them to pray. The number of baptisms surged dramatically. The ancient rituals were alive again. The soul of the nation was being reborn. After the momentous year of 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist. The red flag was lowered, but as one empire crumbled, something else was unmistakably rising in its place: faith. Specifically, Orthodox Christianity experienced an explosive growth. Millions of Russians, feeling adrift in the wake of communism's collapse, embraced the church. They were seeking answers. They were seeking solace. They were seeking a moral compass in a world turned upside down. The old certainties were gone. New ones were desperately needed. The statistics from those years tell a remarkable story. A story of spiritual revolution. Before the reforms, the number of active Orthodox churches was tragically small. After the collapse, thousands of churches were reopened, rebuilt, or newly constructed. The number of monasteries and convents also grew exponentially. Russia was visibly rediscovering its ancient spiritual roots. This profound spiritual awakening was not confined solely to Russia. Across many of the former Soviet republics, a similar pattern emerged. The soul of Russia was finding its way back to God. The Soviet Union, for all its darkness, achieved undeniable feats. Its scientists launched humanity into space. Its soldiers played a decisive role in the defeat of Nazi fascism. Its industries transformed a peasant society into an industrial giant. But this colossus was built on a fundamentally flawed foundation: the denial of God, the systematic suppression of the human spirit. This was its Achilles heel. It sought to build a new world by destroying the old faith. State atheism was an aggressive crusade. It sought to eradicate religious belief from the hearts and minds of the Soviet people. It employed every tool at its disposal. Propaganda filled the schools and media. Persecution targeted clergy and active believers. Education was designed to create the new Soviet man, a being supposedly free from superstition. This grand experiment in social engineering ultimately proved a catastrophic failure. Man cannot live by bread alone. The current spiritual revival in Russia offers a stark, dramatic contrast to that bleak past. The transformation is nothing short of astonishing. Why did the mighty Soviet Union truly fall? The common answers point to economic stagnation, to the crippling cost of the arms race, to political missteps and internal decay. These factors undoubtedly played their part. But there was a deeper, often overlooked reason, a spiritual one. An unseen hand was at work. The soul of a nation, long captive, began to stir, and that stirring shook the foundations of the empire. An empire built upon the sands of militant atheism could not stand indefinitely. not when the souls of its people cried out for God. The system, for all its outward strength, was hollow at its core. It lacked the moral and spiritual foundation necessary to command true allegiance. It could demand obedience. It could inspire fear. But it could not capture the heart. The Christian resurrection in Russia was not merely a consequence of the empire's collapse. It was a cause. The spiritual rebirth of its people was a quiet, profound revolution, the ultimate triumph of the human spirit over a godless tyranny.